All right, welcome into another episode of Debate Night. We are back. We've got new topics. We've got some returning analysts, but new to this week. To start it off, we've got Brodie Smith from Canada, Canadian Brodie.
Yes, I am in Toronto. Played a course yesterday. It took, I think, a combined hour to get there. We were about 3 miles away, and it took an hour to get there, but it was worth it. So
Okay.
be prepared to look for that video from Toronto Island.
Yeah, I thought you were going to play that island course. That's
Yeah,
cool.
that's where they held Worlds back in 1987, the only World
Ooh.
Championships held outside the United States.
Yeah, good
Shout
little
out to
fun fact.
Greg for
There you-
winning.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Jonah is here. New apartment. That's the word on
New
the street.
apartment. Also, I know Brodie's not a fan of my shout outs, but it's my dad's birthday, so I have to shout him out today.
No, you can shout out people. It's fine. That's a good shout out.
Yeah, happy birthday, Dad.
And then Caleb is joining us as well today.
Hoping the third time's the charm.
Third time could be the charm today. All right. So we're going to hop into our first topic here. This is probably the most eventful thing that happened over the weekend. And it didn't take up a lot of time over the weekend. We had this 4-round tournament, but hole 16 on the final day was like one of the most interesting stories just because of how surprising it was. So if you were watching the coverage, Simon Lizotte rolls into hole 16, an island par 3, almost 400 feet. And he's up by 3 at this point. Eagle goes first, throws out of bounds. It's a wrap. This event is effectively over. All he really needs to do is anything at this point. And then he runs up, and you see the disc just disappear out of frame into the sky. It just launched into the air. The commentators are confused. The cameras are all panning around like, what the heck just happened? I was thinking, did he just throw a grenade? Like, what in the world? We finally get the drone shot of it soaring over the green. The commentators piece it together. And effectively, what he did was purposely carried the island green, avoiding every obstacle on the hole in order to secure a guaranteed four with a good chance at 3 due to the rules with this island, where if you just crossed anywhere on that island, you could take it from where it went out. So my question here, a lot of people were like, oh, that's bad course design. That was kind of a consensus, like, oh, this shouldn't happen. The hole shouldn't have been designed this way, even though people were applauding Simon for making a smart play as well. So my question is, should there ever be an opportunity for purposeful OB shots to be a valid course management play in any scenario on any course? Should that ever be an option where that does become a smart play? Or is it just immediately a sign of bad design? Brodie, what do you think?
The first thing I gotta say is one of my favorite things that is like a very disc golf trend that we see from commentators is when they see one thing, they all of a sudden just assume everything moving forward is that same thing. Of where they start talking, Nate Doss started talking about how whole 18 we might see the same strategy as people throwing long OB on purpose. We end up seeing Eagle going long OB on 18, and Nate Doss is like, oh, I bet he did that on purpose. No, Nate, no. This is a very specific scenario of where throwing OB, obviously you have a tap in par. It made a lot of sense. No other scenario does throwing OB, especially on a tee shot on a par 4, no other scenario does throwing OB actually makes sense at all. This was a design flaw. I'm surprised that many people. I guess it just shows that Tour Life is not as popular of a podcast as I thought it was, because me and Yuli discussed this at length about how this was a poor course design and how coming down the stretch, this would be a strategy that potentially would be used if someone had a lead coming down. That was my biggest issue with it, is that I thought it did take a lot of the pressure off that tee shot, because throwing it OB long was not a difficult shot at all. You took all the trees out of play and you went over the top of all of them. So that was my biggest issue with it. But no, this should never be a design. This is why I do not like a lot of times OB really close to baskets, because you end up having people throwing like rollers sometimes, of where it's like, I'm just going to chuck a roller, and if it gets close, great. And if not, if it rolls 200 feet long, I'm just going to have a tap in par. So this is where, to me, this is where I think you need staggered hazard and OB. You have, in this scenario, if this hole would have been, first off, I don't even think they needed OB behind the hole here. I think the rough was bad enough back there to make putts very difficult. But you could have done something where it was OB or hazard for the first like 15 to 20 feet behind the basket, and then from there OB. So that way you don't have these situations where people are just chucking this out. But good play on Simon. I mean, I don't know why people are so shocked by that play. It was the smartest thing to do in that position he was in.
Yeah, certainly worked out. Great for him. Jonah, what did you think about the play?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to echo what Brodie said. It's a bad course design. I'm surprised that Nate Heinold and the tournament staff at Tigo didn't make it an all OB to the drop zone rule on that hole. He's done that in the past at Ledgestone, like at hole 9 at the Bridge hole, at Lake Eureka. So I'm surprised that that wasn't instituted on that hole. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of go in a different direction in terms of the way I think the hole should have played out. There's definitely the bad shot of releasing early like Eagle did in the final round should definitely still be punished. But that being said, it doesn't have to be an island hole. I don't think that hole really needs to be. It's already relatively difficult shot to execute with the downhill with the speed control. You don't want to go deep if you want to have a putt, obviously. So definitely a different way to structure that will be potentially a hazard situation. But I think the rough behind is really thick, and we don't want people putting out of that. It's just bad optics. I think, but generally, this tournament did do a good job of making sure that the OB wasn't, was still visible to the players, and to the audiences as well, so that the spectators on the ground and people watching at home could still see everything. That being said, I think playing OB intentionally should never be a play that a player goes for. It should never be a part of the course design. I think Eagle also went OB in a prior round on 18, throwing the backhand. I'm not sure if that is on purpose or not, although he did it multiple times, so I would assume he didn't change his play. So I'm not sure why he decided to keep doing it. So yeah, it's just nothing that I would have done personally. I think that if I were the tournament staff, I would have definitely made a change to that, either going forward, or we've even seen it in the middle of tournaments. People have changed that rule. So I mean, obviously not great, but nothing nothing the Pro Tour hasn't done yet, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, hey, they repoint painted lines at Worlds that one year, so
That was wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just bottom line, I would still like to see there a play for par on that hole, also on 16. So that hole is kind of like a 2 or a 4 if you don't do what Simon did. Like the way Simon did is the only way to take a 3 on that hole. So I would like to see a way for players to take a par on that hole without having to go OB. So
yeah, that's a fair point. Separation is good, but it is kind of weird when you have a hole where like a 3 is kind of a really rare score when that is par. But that's a whole nother topic. Caleb, what did you think about the whole situation?
I thought it was brilliant. I'm going to be honest. We always say like a pro's job is to kind of play the course and win. And I will say Simon played the course just so brilliantly when it came to this. Do I think it's a valid strategy? Yes. I mean, essentially, Simon took a local line. He took a local line and got rewarded for it. Yes, he went OB long, but I mean, I think it was just a smart strategy. At that time, he had Eagle chasing, and Eagle, I mean, Simon even said this in his post-round interview. He saw Eagle mess up first and knew, then, hey, I could do this and get rewarded for it. Do I think it's an oversight by the TV? Yes. I'm always just against OB around the basket, just because it allows you, usually, if you go long, easy putt for par. If you want to have it, either go to a drop zone, or we forget a few holes earlier, Chris Dickerson went into some rough, had to throw out from the rough. And you want to talk about an optic. The crowd just having a part so he can throw his shot. That was beautiful. It makes Chris' shot so much harder. It makes it think, okay, this is worse than OB. OB, you're taking a stroke and you're getting basically relief. Here it's, when you're playing in the rough, there's no relief. Sucks that you have to throw a shot, but you got to throw it because you had a bad shot. I think that's so much more punishing than what OB could ever be.
Yeah, Caleb, that makes sense. There's definitely the consensus with this whole play was definitely, course design. It was a flaw. And like Brodie kind of mentioned, they were already talking about it on Tour Life. It's interesting that something like that is just like not noticed, or if it was noticed by the staff, that they just think, oh, well, nobody's going to do that, surely. Like, I don't know. It's an interesting one to just like think that, we have pros who I feel like in disc golf you wouldn't assume that they wouldn't be willing to just throw that shot like that, especially in a situation where they just need to guarantee a par or a four at worst. So yeah, I'd be pretty safe to say that we won't see that hole played that way next year. I would
One
imagine.
Yeah, one additional point too that I thought was interesting is when I was like, just make it a drop zone, right? Just
Yeah.
no, let's not even mess around. Because first off, that hole, if you did cross, you were probably going to be better off than the drop zone. So there was never this weird thing of
Mhm.
where, did I cross or didn't I cross? Which I don't like on some of those holes. But it was interesting. Some of the comments I was getting was seeing people being like, well, I don't want like a shot to like hit the basket or like hit the koozie and then roll OB and then have to go to the drop zone and that shot would get punished. And I'm like, disc golf is already incredibly fluky. That is like going to happen 1 out of a million times. Like that's very rarely ever going to happen. So I don't know if we should be protecting ourselves against the 1 out of a million when we already have shots that constantly
Yeah.
get, punished or rewarded that are
Brodie, were you
fluky.
throwing drivers in that hole?
No, Jonah, I was throwing a
Right, of
putter.
course. So I'm saying if
No.
you're throwing
No,
mid,
I was throwing my get flippy actually. It was actually fire.
yeah. So if
Actually
you're
fire.
throwing mid on that hole, the chances of you like having a nasty kick off a basket are like severely decreased, right?
I mean, the chances of it happening are very, very small. Anyways, I don't think
Yeah.
that happened to anyone this week.
Well, yeah, your biggest chance of a rollaway is on a putt, and at that point, you could just play
Yeah.
it where you've already made the island. Then you can take it from where
Kind
it
of
goes
like what
out.
happened to Eagle on hole 1, right? Where
Exactly.
he hit and went OB. Like that's super fluky and super unlucky. But unfortunately, that's kind of disc golf. That's just golf in general. Golf is a very lucky sport at the end of the day. It's hard
Right.
to remove it all.
Yeah, they definitely will change it. I mean, obviously they did. I don't think they wanted people playing in some of that rough. That's why they made it the island. It was really thick in those areas. But yeah, it's pretty simple oversight there. And some people were talking about like, well, to make it a true island, you need to get a waiver. Well, it's like, well, Nate Heinold is the PDGA, so so like that shouldn't have been the hurdle there. But I'm sure it'll change next year. Anyways, we're gonna move on.
Yeah.
Talk a little more about Simon. So Simon grabbed his second elite win of the season, his sixth elite win since the OTB Open last year. That's 2 more wins than any other player during that stretch. Unbelievable. He had only 1 Pro Tour and 1 National Tour win from 2014 to 21. That's kind of from when he started playing U.S. golf consistently up until the year before he won OTB. So he's won 6 in that little span of time before he had only won 2 major events over the course of 7 years. So my question is, what is leading to this dominant stretch of success in the later part of his playing career? Why is he finding so much success now in a harder field than he was able to in those first 7 years? Jonah, what do you think?
So I'm going to take us back to the 2021-2022 offseason. When during that whole 2021 stretch, he was dealing with a nagging elbow injury, nothing that needed surgery, but something that was definitely bothering him throughout the season. It's when he started wearing that arm sleeve. And he actually had to withdraw from the Tour Championship that year. So after that, he takes time to recover from that injury. And also in that time, his kid is born in February. So about 3 months before that OTB Open win. I believe OTB Open was his first start that season, correct? So he went on to win his first event first Pro Tour event that year. So I think that whole offseason
that might not be true. I think he went to Waco.
Maybe he played like one or two beforehand, but I remember him saying coming back in May. So we'll have to double check my
might have to stat check that one.
Fact check on that. But yeah, so I think that offseason just really gave him a chance to reset mentally, reset physically as well, really focus on his body. He's, I think he's approaching 30, if not 30 already. So he's definitely in the later half of his elite career. And I think all of that just kind of gave him a chance to, think about, hey, I got to provide for my kid. I got to make, choose my body over, giving the fans a good time on the course. That's what he was known as before. He was always the guy who would throw the crazy shot. He threw the Skamahawk at DDO, on hole 18 years prior. So I don't think he would ever do that now unless he had like a 7-stroke lead. But in any case, I think that's really important to factor in those two things, thinking about, okay, what are my priorities now, and that offseason gave him a chance to really establish those concretely and go forward. And I think he's been really, taking those seriously and changed his game because of it.
Yeah, certainly a lot of things changed in that offseason. Caleb, what do you think has led to his success as of late?
I think honestly what's leading to Simon's success more than anything is he finally learned how to play golf. He's not doing these crazy Simon lines anymore. He is playing good, clean golf. I mean, when he came back, I believe Portland Open, he was talking about he's no longer throwing these giant PD2s when he was with Discmania. He's now throwing a flippy DD3 on a hyzer flip. So he went from this very showy, aggressive play to more, I'd say, slightly conservative. He just toned it down a bit. I mean, if you're ever learning disc golf or just trying to get better, they tell you never throw at 100%. Throw at 60 to 80% to get your lines. And that's essentially what Simon's doing is he's kind of focusing in that power and all that to throw cleaner lines, more well-executed lines. He's playing golf. Also, money talks. Simon, I'd say, what was it, 2020 DDO, the one that they put on CBS. He had said, I'm more about making money than winning. Well, MVP gave him a lot of money, and you know what? I bet a lot of that money is also in bonus structure. Money talks, and I think that's a part of what's leading to Simon is, hey, there's real money now in the sport. It's better money, so why don't I win some? Also, once you get that taste of victory, you don't like to lose it. You ever win, you keep on wanting to win. So I think that could definitely be a few things.
Yeah, it definitely, after that first win, things started snowballing for sure. Brodie, what do you think has been leading to Simon playing so dominant?
I'm going to go a little different route. I'm going to say it's the success that he's had on YouTube. I think now that he has built this community on YouTube to where he can put out content, make videos of him throwing those crazy shots, of him going for aces, of him doing all that stuff that he used to do on coverage, he doesn't have the need to actually have to do that. For Simon to create his name and really how he became such a popular player was because of all those crazy shots that Jonah and Caleb were just talking about Simon was doing on coverage in tournaments. He's no longer doing that anymore. A good example is like hole 15, like an old Simon shot, hole 15 from years past would have been that big, huge flex line over the trees and trying to get way up there. And sure, if it lands in the fairway, everyone goes nuts. But most likely, it's probably not going to. It's going to be in some sort of terrible rough, and he's going to have to scramble and make himself try to save par. The other thing I think that we've seen in the last few years get really more consistent with Simon is his putting. I played with Simon a few years ago at the European Open, and like the first round, he had a really bad putting performance. And that was really the only thing that held him back from shooting potentially at one of the hotter scores of the day. I haven't really seen Simon struggle that much like in recent years or recent tournaments rather on the putting green. It seems like he has been putting in a lot of time. He has talked about how he has a putting basket in his house that he puts, I believe, in his basement. So I think he is putting a lot of time now in putting and realizing that is probably the most important part of his game for him to be successful. So I think those two things we're seeing him because there's no doubt he is one of the most talented players when it comes to the backhand. And for him to be able to tone it down and be able to throw shots that he consistently can hit, I think that's why we're seeing a lot of success from him in these last two seasons.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think a lot of it boils down to, and this putting has certainly become a big part of the puzzle, but I think a lot of it boils down to he toned out in his game, I think a lot because of that injury. And then when he found out, oh, wait a second, I can win with this, that kind of flips a switch when you realize that you can still win on tour. And that definitely changes your mindset heading into events. It has been interesting.
I'm going to use my rebuttal card on Brodie really fast here. I think that
okay.
was he still doing YouTube prior to COVID, or I know it blew up during COVID, but he had a solid following on YouTube, on Instagram prior to his injury, prior to this change in 2022 with his game. So
but I don't think I don't think it was nearly what it is obviously now, and I don't think he was putting nearly as much content out as he is now.
Right.
Pre-COVID, I mean, there was a stretch. I don't know. I think he's kind of toned it down a little bit recently, but there was a stretch where he was like posting a video uh, every week. And I think if you go
Yeah,
back to
that
his
was I think
YouTube,
that
he
was
wasn't.
during
He
like
wa-
the 2020, 2021 time. So that but he was still struggling at that point. So I mean, if that's your argument is like he's has, an outlet to do those crazy shots now. Even in his YouTube videos now, he's throwing like smooth little putter shots on these New England courses for ace runs to promote his, Music City Open proxy or whatever. So I
yeah.
think that's like yes, I mean it definitely
I'm just saying I don't think he has to. I think he's built up a name now to where he doesn't. I think before he probably felt a lot of pressure from the fans and whatnot to be that super entertaining, throw the crazy shots. I don't think he feels that pressure anymore. I don't think he feels like he has to step up to a hole and make sure that he throws farther than everyone else on his
Yeah,
card.
but
Where I can tell you
that's
there
not
are.
because he has a YouTube outlet. It's because he's a father and has someone to be a role
Okay,
model for now.
the father thing is a dark horse play there. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if him being a father all of a sudden makes him feel like I don't want to. No, I'm
Trevor's the only
saying
one who can
he
speak on
has.
this, so I don't want
I'm
to
just saying
make
he
any
has
moves
more of
here.
a set position now to where, if you are someone trying to make a name for yourself on tour right now and you don't have social media, you probably need to do something on live coverage or something like that to make a name for yourself. He doesn't feel the need to have to do that. And I think once that went away of where he's not being expected to throw crazy shots, right? No one's expecting Simon to throw a crazy shot anymore. I think taking that weight off of him actually has helped a lot. He can just go out and play disc
Did
golf.
people ever expect him to throw crazy shots like
Yes.
at any point?
Yes.
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 Like
Yes.
yeah,
Simon, come on, Simon. Simon. Yes.
There's a reason it's
Yes.
called the Simon line.
People are literally yelling at him to
Yeah.
throw certain shots for sure.
yeah. I
That's-
mean
It's
the
kind of it's gonna be
professionalism
kind of
of our spectators
it's gonna
is
kind
a
of be
whole
too
other
like
conversation that I would love to have. But I just
it'll,
want to make the point that it's not all because of the YouTube. If that were true, then would his success on YouTube would be directly correlated to his success on the course, and that's not the case.
Hit him with it. I would. I mean, it's definitely not one of anything in specific. I think both arguments make sense. I agree that I think uh, some changes in his life structure and things have changed his play on the course. But also, I do see the point that the YouTube audience getting to where it is, even if it has been in a certain place for a while. But I think ultimately a big thing with Simon was just he won and realized, oh, I can win playing this way. And that changes things really quickly. When you find the recipe to how to win on tour, you're going to try and follow that recipe over and over and over again. And when he puts everything together, he's really good at disc golf. All right, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to the next topic. I've got a very interesting proposal here. This one I kind of cooked up last night. So Kristen Tatar, the FPO division's most premier player, has been missing multiple Elite Series events and now a playoff event due to her own schedule preferences this year, not injury. Kristen Tatar already has a really nice contract from Latitude 64. She wins practically everything she plays in. She already has earned a ton of money just from winnings this year. There's no real incentive for her to show up just to take home another prize pool. So my proposal here is, should the tour, because the tour is trying to incentivize players to get to their plus events with bigger purses. Clearly that wasn't enough for Kristen to change some of her schedule priorities. So my question is, should the tour aim to incentivize certain star players to play their big events? I can't imagine the tour wants the high-paid superstars to skip their largest showcases with the biggest crowds. My proposal would be that certain high-ranked players would get appearance bonuses correlated to their ranking. So you would still earn them by being ranked high enough, but it would be another way that the tour could guarantee their biggest players coming to their biggest events, because clearly it hasn't been enough. So what if Kristen knew that just by showing up, she was going to make $5,000? Now, maybe that's not in the budget now, but is that an idea that would ever make sense for the tour? Something I kind of cooked up. Caleb, what do you think?
I think it's got some legs under it. We're talking about Kristen missing so many events. She's played 9 out of the possible 15 to play, 16 if you include the tour championship. The biggest person that's missed a lot of events is Macbeth. Macbeth has only played 6 events on tour, I believe 8 if you count the majors. I mean, we went this season without seeing a lot of Macbeth. But if you want to talk about like, hey, some incentives, cash incentives could work, but 5,000 to someone that's making 125 a year, it is some money, but how much does it have to be? I think a few other things. I mean, an incentive doesn't have to just be positive. Think about, hey, if you don't hit a mandatory minimum of this amount of events, you could look at a probation of your tour card or a shortening of your tour card. I mean, that's a real possibility that you could do. Also, I mean, you can make it to where, hey, it is mandatory if you have a tour card, you have to play Elite Series or Elite Plus or the playoff, whatever you want to call it now. And you kind of separate to where you have to play this many Elite Series, you have to play this many Elite Plus. You can sprinkle in a few silver if you want to. But if you make it aware, hey, it could be a thing of you can either gain financially or suffer financially. That can be really I'd say the flip incentive to make people attend events. I mean, we talk about all the time people, getting that, time on Jomez, time on DGN to grow their brand when you have a newcomer on the scene. But likewise, if you've got someone that, hey, why aren't they on tour anymore? Oh, it's because they never wanted to play an event, so they got their, tour card revoked. Okay, well, I guess I'm not seeing Ben Calloway for a while then.
Yeah, no, that's certainly another way to look at it. The idea that they could just make it a requirement. I'm not sure how it would go over, but it is their right. Brodie, what do you think?
I think the appearance fee stuff makes sense for tournaments that are really hard to get people to go to. Deglo was not a tournament that was difficult to get people to go to. The biggest issues that we're having right now is simply just the European players coming over here financially. It doesn't make the most sense to just have a full tour over here for them. And then also there are a lot of big events in Europe that are still potentially more premier or to them, matter more. I think what we're seeing a few years ago, we were seeing some players deciding to play like their favorite A tier event instead of a disc golf pro tour event. We're not seeing that anymore. If you're good at disc golf, you are playing in a disc golf pro tour event, not an A tier event. Now, if you're like kind of towards the bottom of the barrel, pro player, then maybe yes, we see some of those players, but no one really is missing them at these pro tour events. Right now, we're still seeing, some European players still have that, and I think that won't really go away. And I think that's okay. I think it's fine to have two different kind of tours going on. Europe's a big scene. I don't think the pro tour is going to ever have this worldwide dominance, I guess you can say, on everyone. And I don't think we necessarily want that. I think having a good European tour over there to build up younger players, I think is a smart thing for the sport moving forward. But the appearance fee, to me, that's like if Foundation was doing some sort of charity event and we wanted a couple big names to come, we would throw appearance fees at them. I don't think it makes any sense for the pro tour to throw appearance fees at players to go to their events.
Fair enough. Jonah, what do you think? Do you think they should have a system in place for getting these players?
I'm not sure if the appearance payment is enough. When I read this question, I originally thought of the UFC and how they still, have, if they, make weight and they show up for the fight healthy, then they get, a certain deposit from the company to, have the fight. But if they still win, they obviously get a bonus and there's fight of the night and all that stuff. But that is not. I don't think that's the way disc golf should be. I think that if we have, if we have majors, right? There's a reason. Like think about every other individual sport. Does the casual fan care about watching those regular tour events? Yeah, maybe if they're more involved in the sport, and if they're maybe a player of the sport and they want to watch their favorite pros all the time. But I mean, does ESPN cover a random tennis tournament or I'm trying to think of other ones or a random bowling tournament or something like that? No, they cover the majors. So I think that's why majors are so important, especially as our sport continues to globalize. Hot take: a third of the top 20 in MPO will be European by the end of the decade. Hot take.
Okay.
But I think that this is why the majors really need to be hyped up, because that's where all the best players will be. That's where the Pro Tour is going to, really expose themselves to a greater audience. Like, hey, if you want to see more of these players, subscribe to DGN, subscribe to the other European markets. So I think that is really where we need to focus our energy on, is like, hey, do we really need every single player at every single event? No, I think it's fun to see some new faces and see some local pros really shred some places up. But that being said, we also want to see the majors really excel past the rest of the events. And I think that this will be obviously the PGA has control over the majors right now, so that's to be decided. But having a way to elevate the majors by having those complete fields, I think is really the way we should move forward as a sport. And so that's what I think is the best way going forward to maximize appearances.
Yeah, fair enough. And the Elite Plus events, and right now there's, you mentioned Caleb, Paul Macbeth has missed out on events now. He was, I think, carrying out some bidding for the Pro Tour being over there in Europe. Those are still broadcasted events. And the Kristen situation, like Brodie mentioned, yes, with the European players, there's good reason for them to be, doing their own thing. It's definitely not on them. It's more so as you continually get. So right now you have this like imbalance with certain player contracts like Kristen or a Paul Macbeth or any of like the 6-figure and up really players, where they're guaranteed money. And even just if they're really good players, they're going to do so well in earnings at the events they do attend that it's going to be really tough to those contracts are kind of out of balance with purse levels a lot of times. So it's going to be really tough to get them out to those events just for the fact that they want to be out there making money on the road.
I had a very very good thought here. What if the Pro Tour signs players, and or the European Tour or whatever, the tour signs the player, not the sponsor?
That seems like a conflict of interest.
Yeah. Well, now you're going exactly to what mixed martial arts is.
Right.
That's literally what the different promotions in mixed martial arts is.
Their idea to encourage someone to stay with a tour.
Well, okay, but doesn't that also was it 2021 Music City Open where Mason Ford win and Ricky laid up? It like brings in that thing of like, okay, did they pay it off?
Like, that was the conspiracy.
Like,
yeah, if you had certain players that were signed by a tour and like UFC, you have to get a UFC contract. Correct me if I'm wrong, to be fighting on the UFC.
Yes.
It would be one thing if everybody who was on the tour was signed to a tour sponsorship contract, but if you had certain players that weren't, you'd be like, oh, shocker, sponsored player Valerie Mandujano from the tour is on a feature card again. Like, I wonder how.
Yeah, if you did that, because that's not a terrible idea, right? Like, I've talked about, what if disc golf went the route of where they just like had a tour of 30 people.
Yeah.
Right. And they're just like, these 30 people are on tour and everyone else is off tour. And every week you just see these 30 people duke it out. For that to happen, one, you need to have a competition tour. You need to have some sort of competitor to where they, people are fighting over. Because right now, if you want to play in the, in the United States, you're playing on the Disc Golf Pro Tour. But it is good to know that Jonah thinks that 2 Europeans in the top 15 at their home major at the European Open is the trend that they are going to start dominating the United States.
He's giving it a decade, man. They're all being born right now.
Give it till 2030. I'm thinking.
I agree with you if you're talking about FPO. I do not agree with you talking about MPO.
Time will tell. I do think as the Pro Tour continues to develop their tour cards and make that more of a qualification and implement that, they will continue to add certain things that need to be upheld to card holders. I think that's just going to be part of the process.
I think the easiest thing is like, the amount of points that you need right now to get into the tour championship at the end of the year is so much harder. Like, it's so much harder to get into the tour championship this year than it was last year. It's going to keep getting harder. And it's the same thing is it's going to be so much harder to get your tour card. Like, getting your tour card last year, not that hard. If you played every single Disc Golf Pro Tour event last year, you probably are going to get your tour card. That's going to get harder and harder and harder. And so it's going to make people want to play more and more events. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, the top guys, for them, it's, we're lucky that Calvin is just a freaking maniac and wants to play every event because he doesn't have to,
Yeah.
right? He could pick and choose his events. And I don't think there's really any way of getting rid of that. There's gonna be some guys that just play half the season. It is what it is.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. Jonah, though, you did make a good point. The majors are ultimately what a lot of sports and individual sports do get behind. And that is one thing that we've yet to really just see players, other than the European Open for obvious reasons, but we've yet to see players just skipping out on majors that they can get to. All right, we're going to move into our last topic here for elimination. So we're in a part of our schedule now where, excluding silver events, we're just talking about the elite and the majors. We've got all these 4-round events now. We've kind of made it to that point in the schedule. We've got USDGC, we've got the playoff events, we've got Worlds, which is a 5-round event. So I'll say 4+ round events. A lot of the disc golf schedule at this point has gone to way more 4-round events than it previously. We still have a solid amount of 3-round events, but they've sprinkled in more of the 4 rounds. The Elite Plus are 4 rounds with a cut even. So my question here is, have the recent 4-round events shown that 4-round tournaments produce the best and most exciting results? Or do you think they're overkill for most events, and should they only really be reserved for majors, maybe those plus events? What do we think, Brodie?
So I think 4 rounds, obviously the more rounds you have, and one of the reasons why, you have Paul have that dominant world championship run was because they had so many rounds at world championships. The best player is going to win the majority of the time, the longer you have it, right? The longer you extend it. So I think 4 is a good number, because I think it still adds in the flukiness of where someone can pop off and have a weekend and win. But 3 rounds, I think, is far too little. I think we should actually kind of do away with the 3 rounds. And also, players, I think, are starting to realize that they don't need to have 4 days of practice before a tournament. They can have 3 days of practice or 2 days before practice and be ready to go for that tournament. Now, obviously, it's a little bit different when we go to like a Ledgestone where we're playing 2 different courses. It is nice to have a little bit extra time to practice both courses, but I love 4 rounds a lot. I wish they did cuts after 2 rounds. I don't know why we aren't doing cuts at all, but I love 4 rounds. And then the other thing too is I think the more we start experimenting with changing basket locations rather, and even changing tee locations, making some par 4s a little bit shorter to maybe they're reachable. And now it's a reachable par 4, but there's a lot of trouble. And then backing them up on Sunday and making it really challenging. I think the more we can adjust that, now we're not seeing the same exact hole over and over. And like I said, like hole 2 played, I think, a little bit differently. Hole 1 didn't really play that much different for most people. But hole 2 played a little bit differently. And then especially hole 11, you saw players go forehand. Like we saw Kevin Jones almost ace it twice when it was in that short position with his flex forehand. And then when they put it in that back position, a lot of players now are throwing backhand turnovers. So you're actually seeing different shots. I think start manipulating those. I've talked about Mandos too. I'm a big fan of adding Mandos, removing Mandos, doing that. The more we can manipulate a course, I think will also make these 4 rounds more exciting from day to day. Because if going into Sunday, holy cow, they're setting this thing up as hard as possible. It's going to be a bloodbath out there. That to me is going to be more exciting than, we're seeing the same course we saw the first 3 days.
Yeah, certainly a big part of the equation, especially if you're playing one course. Jonah, do you like the 4-round format, or do you think there's still a place for 3 rounds?
I do like the 4-round format a lot better. And I think if we keep the tournament at one course with the changes as opposed to 2 courses, that is even more conducive because the audience is still used to seeing some of those lines. But that being said, we can change a pin location, change a Mando, change a tee location, like Brodie was saying. I think that is really helpful for the audience. It's a smaller change to the eye, but it's still important. And that's something also that the commentators can really excel and improve their role in, is saying, hey, this position is playing way harder today. I have to throw this, weird like 3-angle shot as opposed to a flat to hyzer or something along those lines. So I think that's something really important going forward. That being said, an aspect of professionalism and what a pro sport really has above the amateur level is that preparation aspect. What who shows up to the course that weekend really should be the person who's most prepared, whose game is best suited for that course on that weekend. So I think that a 4 round event will really show who is most prepared that weekend. And of course, talent is a factor in that. The Gannons of the world, the Corridons of the world are just gonna have those weekends where they just to demonstrate how talented they are, and that's why our sport is so exciting. Is because really anybody talented enough is capable of winning right now. And I think that going forward, there's a few tournaments I want to point out that I think can really benefit from this. Music City is a great option of that. That course really does have good opportunities for different pin locations, so I would love to see that in a 4 round event. Jonesboro is another one I would love to see. I know Brodie's a big fan of this side of heaven out there in Arkansas. And there's another one I wrote down. Des Moines, maybe even. I know they've experimented with different pin positions in the past, but those type style of courses, similar to what we saw from Diego, what we saw from Lake Eureka, an idea where having the same course over 4 rounds really gives that continuity, and then also gives the opportunity for some changes, and why I think USDGC is the most revered tournament among pros today.
Yeah, definitely need more pin locations. I agree. There are a good amount of courses. I think Deglo being one of them. Honestly, at the toboggan course, that they could do way more pin locations and changes,
Yep.
and it's not super difficult. So I'd like to see them get it way more into that. Because personally, I think the 2 course thing is fun for disc golf, but I'd rather have an audience get to learn a course with just subtle changes that keep it interesting. I don't know, Caleb, what do you think?
I think Brodie and Jonah both hit 2 different points, but they're missing that kind of key ingredient right there. Who does this really benefit? And that's the fans. I mean, essentially, we're asking, hey, do you want more golf? Duh. I mean, I want as much golf as I can watch, and having that 4 round gives me an extra day to watch it. Having this ability allows more ticket sales possibly. That's more added revenue to the pot. That's more long-term logistics. It can pay for more cameras, more viewership for the guys that can attend. We're looking at that, and also when we think about that's more airtime for sponsors. If I'm Barbasol and I'm sponsoring the Pro Tour, oh my gosh, I'm not getting just usually 3 days a week of airtime. I'm getting 4. That's a lot more time. And hey, if I'm the Pro Tour, that's more I can charge. So it's also more money I could be putting in the pockets of my players and making the events even better. Also, I think this would allow every tournament to have a cut and really kind of legitimize that cut to be like, okay, it's really cutthroat now. We're getting to where, hey, Saturday really is a moving day. You got to pull like Simon, pull 11 under out. Hey, I can get on lead card, see where that goes. I believe those are just a few things that really, I mean, can make a 4-day and should make a 4-day worth it. When we go that, and then a local A tier, by its definition, is usually 3-day event with tee time. So this again gives that more separation to the Pro Tour, of hey, yes, we are PGA sanctioned, but we're not of the PGA. We are, a little more professional. We are a little more well developed, and we're a little more well trained.
Yeah, very, very good points, Caleb. And it's a great addition there with the monetary side of things. Obviously, an extra day is an extra day of staffing, but I think the Pro Tour honestly salaries a lot of their employees anyways, and the extra day's revenue is a valid point. So I had Jonah and Caleb tied, but I did fact check you, Jonah, and OTB Open was Simon's 5th start that year, not his first start. So I'm going to have to dock you a point for that one. Got to keep people honest. That's 2 episodes in a row. People just throwing out the grenades there. We had Steven claiming that that Hammons didn't have a win last week.
Yeah.
It's just, man, I mean, I'm really on my toes. But
Guy,
hey, if you throw it in there quick enough, I might not know it half the time. I mean, you guys should just start throwing in false stats at me and see if I can even catch them. But we're going to get into our elimination round here. We got Brodie and Caleb. Let's get into the rapid fire round. All right. 3 topics. Side the winner. Brodie's got a 1-point lead here. Brodie, would you like to go first or second?
Definitely second.
Okay. All right.
I literally just saw the first question. I'm like, what the heck?
Excellent. All right. So as we get, we're in the postseason now, if that's what you want to call it. We had our first playoff event. Now we have to wait a long time for the second one. But as we get near to the Tour Championship, that cut line for the Tour Championship is very tough these days, very difficult. A lot of players that are really good on the outside looking in, and some players that have kind of snuck their way to the inside that maybe surprise you. So we're going to do kind of both sides of the coin here. But my first question is, which player that is currently inside of the Pro Tour Championship cut line, so they are currently safe, it surprises you the most? And I'll say, no, I won't add any stipulations. We'll leave it as that. Which one is surprising you most that they're there, Caleb?
It's really tough MPO and FPO wise. I would definitely say MPO is Vina Makala. I know he did well, I think, open to Austin. He tied for 6th. But other than that, really haven't heard anything from Vino. It's been just a very quiet season. And when you look at all who's out, it's kind of shocking that he's in my opinion, for the little events he's played and just how quiet of a season he's had. So if we're going to go FPO, though, Stacey Ronsley. Again, just a very quiet season. Haven't heard much from her. So yeah,
no, there's definitely certain players who just kind of chill in good enough spots and have good enough finishes. But yeah, like Stacey Ronsley, for example, I haven't heard her name really at all this year. All right, Brodie, who's surprising you the most?
I applied you for the FPO pick. I'm just going to stick to MPO.
Okay.
For me, I have it between two guys. I feel like I'm going to give it to Nico. Not because of skill level, not because of his past of being one of the top players, if not at one point one of the best players in the world. Just a super quiet season. We haven't really seen him in contention at really that many events. He has had a couple top 10 finish, or being in kind of the top of the leaderboards at a couple events, but nothing to where in the past of where he's kind of in contention and could potentially win. So he's had a very, very quiet season for him. The other guy I was thinking about was Chris Clemens. Just also a very quiet season for him as well, with just their talent level. But again, that just kind of goes to show you that it is so hard right now. I love that they changed it from the top 32 to the top 31 now because of Parker Welk.
Yeah.
Shout out to Parker. It's hard to get in the top 31. It is. It is really, really difficult to get in there. So I think those two guys, I would say, are probably the best players that are in that bottom 10 is what I would consider.
Well, we were talking about kind of before, there is still some power to playing all the events. Clemens and Nico play their road warriors. They play all the time. And you can have a quiet season at the tour right now, but still just kind of float in that top 30 and have a really good points add up. Like a top 30 finish will do good for you these days in the points. And especially when you're playing week in and week out, like you mentioned, those guys have not really been in contention to win this year. But there's not a lot of guys that have been in contention to win this year. It's really tough to get yourself in that place. All right, so
I'm just saying Nico because I still think he has potential of winning tournaments.
Yeah,
right?
No, he's certainly a guy who in the past few seasons has started to kind of slip a little bit down those rankings as newer, younger players get in. All right, we're going to kind of go to the flip side of the coin now and say which player that is currently on the outside of the Pro Tour Championship cut line most surprises you that you were there, Brodie, and you can't really name yourself.
No, I'm not surprised. I've had a terrible season. There's actually a lot of people that I'm surprised that now looking at it for the first time, I'm like, I can't believe that person's not in there. I think the one that jumps out at me the most is Gavin Babcock. It kind of is the opposite of what I said with Nico. I think he's had some of these tournaments of where we're like, holy cow, is Gavin going to win? And it's not like he just falls apart the final round. It's more, he kind of went up against the buzzsaw with Gannon at Des Moines. He's had some pretty good success also at majors in the past. If you go back to last year's Champions Cup, he was in the mix to win that as well. So he's had some really good finishes. Looking at it, he had a top 10 at Cascade. He obviously got third at Des Moines, top 20 at Innova. But with him, it just seems like he's either playing really, really, really well or playing not good.
Yep.
there's not too much of the middle.
Yeah.
He did just get a top 20 at Deglo, so that is a solid finish there. But yeah, he just has some finishes where he's getting like 96 at Jonesboro. Like, what
Yeah.
happened there? Did he
Yeah.
get injured or something? Like, that makes him 87th at Music City. So
Yeah.
he's definitely a volatile player, but someone that I guess his ceiling when he's playing well is up there with pretty much everyone else's.
Yeah, I think Gavin's a good pick. He is a super high ceiling player, really good
So,
athlete,
yeah.
and has not been touring for very long at all. Not been in the sport a ton. I think he has a college athletics, a college wrestling background, but he is a guy to keep the lookout for because I'm still seeing progression from Gavin Babcock. And like you said, he's contending on some weekends and then just off the face of the planet the next. So he's going to be an interesting one to watch. Caleb, who's surprising you the most?
I think MPO wise, it's got to be Andrew Marweed. I've always known Marweed as that very consistent, very solid, smooth guy. He's not going to win. Or if he does win, it's a shorter course, Idlewild wooded course, but like he's almost always in the top 20. I mean, that's what I've known Marweed for years. He's usually top 30, top 20, and it's kind of shocking to me this year that he's really died off. He popped off at Ledgestone, and then he kind of just went quiet again. And that really has shocked me because I've just known Marweed all these years as kind of a quiet, consistent guy. He does his job. He gets his points. He'll show up at the Tour Championship. He'll show up at Idlewild, show up at a few other courses, and then he just goes on his merry way. And then I don't know if they just have this in because she's injured and she's not playing, but Paige Pierce on the FPO side. She did have 2 wins this year, but she's, I think, right now 25th in the FPO Pro Tour standings. And I know she's injured. I know she's not playing. But, they've got Valerie Mendojano for her tour win at Idlewild as qualifying, but not Paige Pierce. So I don't know if that's just an oversight or I don't know what's going on.
Oh, yeah, no, it's definitely an oversight, yeah.
Must be the
If you have a win,
just,
you're in.
yeah, they may have just taken her out preemptively because of
She's
the
not gonna
injury.
play.
So they're just trying to keep that up to date. But that is an interesting spot. I do agree with the Marweed. When you talk about, Babcock, you kind of went 2 different routes. Babcock is somebody who this season, even watching him surprises you. Marweed has had a really bad season, but given the last couple years and where his trajectory was heading, it is very surprising seeing him this season missing out on that cut line. So I see that point.
Can I do an honorable mention too?
Sure.
I'm not quite sure what's going on with him. Garrett Gerthy, just outside the cut line right now. Did not play at Deglo, so I don't know if he pulled out. If there's some sort of injury that he's dealing with, but that's a name that we're used to seeing. Especially on the longer courses, up towards the top of the leaderboard. So, double G.
They just dropped a new jerky flavor, so maybe he was in the kitchen. He was developing it. That must be it. All right, we're going to move on to our last topic here. We have the Tour Championship, obviously sitting at the end of our season here. An event that is still trying to find its identity. Now, they're changing the format this year. They're kind of moving it more into traditional golf, but still going to have some gimmicky aspects to it. So my question is, will the Tour Championship, even with its giant purse, ever carry the prestige of a major win? The PGA Tour and the FedEx Cup and the Tour Championship, that event has, winning the FedEx Cup and that it's certainly a prestigious thing, but it's never quite risen to the level of a major in golf. So in disc golf, will we see the Tour Championship kind of get to that level of prestige as it moves forward, or does it already? And if not, why not? Those are the questions. So Caleb, what do you think?
I'm going to be I don't think he'll ever have the prestige of a major. The way I view, and I think the way most people view the Tour Championship, is it is the money grab at the end of the season. It's, do you guys remember the brackets they did a few years ago on the Tour Championship? Come on. It was like, oh, who's going to win? And like, everyone was like, oh, what was it? Ian had said like, oh, Nathan Queen, you weren't in anyone's bracket. You didn't even get this far. Like, it feels so hokey at times. It's just like, okay, yes, we're chasing points, but it's a kind of add-on event at the end of the season, right after USDGC, which I kind of consider the end of the year. we go out with a bang at the end of the year. Last year it was Gannon's win, and that was amazing. That was, just very emotional for everyone there. But then on top of that, it's got that gimmicky handicap that we see a lot in golf. And yes, we do see that in a lot of golf events. But when we're talking about disc golf, a lot of things that are gimmicky in our sport are the course, not the layout, not the format. I mean, match play. I mean, that's not even on the schedule anymore. And that was a gimmick in itself last year. And now we're looking at, hey, do you think this gimmick-ish tournament will ever, have the prestige of a major? I mean, you're right. I mean, it's a gimmick from the get-go. I mean, it's a money grab. It's a good, big money grab at the end. I'm glad for the players that can play in that. I mean, end of the year, though, it just feels kind of a gimmick and not that prestige of USDGC Worlds. Even though that's, kind of prestige that the fans and players have given it, I think when you kind of say, hey, at the end of the year, this is your money grab, that's kind of the reputation that event gets.
Yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment of the reputation. It does feel kind of almost like a end of the season all-star celebration. Oh, and there's this giant purse. I don't know, though. They are making some changes this year to the format. Brodie, do you think that those changes are going to be enough?
Well, I think a lot of this has to do just with the timing of everything. So Champions Cup, for example, they just decided to make that a thing, and they were going through initially the initial gimmick of it was we were going to play like 2 rounds, and then at the end of the 2 rounds, the top 4 advance, and they were going to wipe away all the scores and then play like that was going to be the weirdest thing ever. Happy that didn't happen, but Champions Cup hasn't been around that often, and people are starting to already care about Champions Cup, right? And it's making a name for itself. One, because I think the course that's it's at a great course, and it's also one of the few that are like the wooded majors. Like everyone knows, like you have to go and play the woods to win this. I think the one thing the Tour Championship has for itself that golf is struggling with right now is I just looked this up because I was curious. The Masters, which is, I would say if you live in the United States, is probably the most famous golf major. That was started back in 1934. Okay. The Tour Championship in golf was debuted in 1987. So there was like a big 50-year gap of where the Tour Championship didn't exist. Disc golf Champions Cup literally just got created not that long ago. So there's not this huge long line outside of like the World Championships and maybe USDGC. There's not this long lineage of years and years and years of history. So the Tour Championship is kind of throwing themselves in the mix right now to where 20 years from now, it could be a big prestigious event. Versus if disc golf continued to kind of grow at where it's at now, and then 20 years from now we decide to make a new event, they're going to be like, well, we've been having all these other events for 20 plus years. Why does this event matter at all? So I think the timing matters a little bit. But yeah, I think it won't ever be on the same level as a major, but I think right now it's actually really kind of close, a lot closer than the Tour Championship in golf is to the majors in golf.
That's actually a very valid point when you mentioned the start time. Caleb, do you have another point?
I'll just say, Brodie, do you think, and this is just my thought, I think having the Tour Championship literally the week after USDGC takes all the wind out of that event.
It's bad. I think the end of the season schedule is something that obviously has to be addressed. It's something that they are talking about. They're looking to do a complete overhaul of the schedule in the next couple of years. They're working at potentially starting it on the East Coast and then going out west only once, which I would love. But yes, right now the back end of the season is way too heavy. I think between Worlds and USDGC is too close, way too close. You have Champions Cup and you have European Open, and European Open's even kind of late in the season. But like the beginning of the season, you have nothing. So I think we need to push stuff way earlier in the season.
Yeah, it is. Disc golf with the tour starting in February, it is crazy to see 3 of the majors July and further in the season. But
and I think a bit of that problem is the Disc Golf Pro Tour doesn't own the majors. It's the PDGA.
True.
And so they're kind of
and Innova.
And Innova. but like they're kind of at the mercy of them. I mean, heck, if you want to get an A tier registered, the PGA picks the date for you. I mean, you don't get any, like, you can be like, I'd like it this week. And they're just like, we'll think about it. But I mean, I definitely think that's a big part of the issue is Pro Tour's trying to do their thing, and PGA's like, no, we've got our own agenda and our own way of doing it.
Yeah, it's tough to say how much they care about the major scheduling. I think that everything just needs bumped up a little bit to create a little more separation, like Brodie was saying. I mean, the back end of the schedule is way too heavy with big events and events that we need to care about, and they happen so fast that like, well, worlds will happen, and then we'll stack on we'll have MVP, then USDGC, then the Tour Championship, these 3 huge events right after, and be like, oh my gosh, remember Worlds was like a month ago? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the schedule right now for me, and I've played a lot of the silver events as well, and it looks like you start with 6 events, either elite or silver, then you go Champions Cup, then you play, what is this, 8 events? You play 9 events, and then you go European Open, and then I'm playing 3 events, Worlds, 1 event, USDGC, and then hopefully the Tour Championship. So it's like they could definitely move Champions Cup up a few weeks and then move European Open, or keep European Open where it is and move like USDGC way up.
Yeah.
And the big issue though, I think too, that they're going to have is like World Championships, right? Everyone makes that the biggest one. That should be, if that's the biggest thing, that should be the final event. But then you have the playoffs, and it's like, okay, well, the playoffs make sense to also be towards the end of the season. So that's a weird one for me. It doesn't make sense.
It's gonna. We are once again, we are in the infancy of disc golf, as much as people don't necessarily realize it. Like,
we're still trying to figure out a lot of stuff.
There is a lot of like, people need to be willing to rip up scheduling traditions or whatever, and just get things set where they can last for a long time, and that's just gonna make the most sense at the beginning. All right, there you have it. That's another episode of Debate Night. Brodie is our champion today by 1 point. Canadian Brodie. He can win when he's standing. He can win when he's outside of the country. Those are the stipulations we've discovered. And he's going to and he said he's going to the Hockey Hall of Fame today. He's really gonna love it. Gonna go touch the Stanley Cup.
No. Will not be doing any of that. I will be driving for half the day and then practicing the other half. But I will say one thing that is very strange is, how did we go from never playing a Pro Tour event at a course to having it host the World Championships and then never playing at the course again?
Talking about Utah?
What's the...
Hey man,
I'm surprised there's not a Pro Tour event at the Fort. That course is
just don't try and play it before June, because it was underwater. We tried.
Okay.
So that was definitely part of the issue. It's like, it was underwater.
The Fort, even if it's not an elite event, the Fort would make for a great silver event. It is a baffling one for me why are we going back there?
Hey,
so I don't know what the answers are for that, but it is a weird one.
Something to think about.
Something to think about.
At Jeff Spring. All right, that was another episode of Debate Night. Hopefully you enjoyed. We'll see you next week.